We are revisiting back again a year later, Vervaeke number 7, which is interesting. I think we had attempted this previously and had devolved down into strong arguments about precise philosophical definitions. And I think, as a lesson, we both took forward is the importance of those definitions, but also the unclarity, perhaps, of this lecture, making it a bit difficult, in particular, because I think you had some really important insights of your own based on your understanding. And so you're going to take away the summary as you usually do, and just for our listeners, the understanding that, this is also going to be an interpretive summary and a definitional summary that we'll see what you say this time, but I may or may not agree that this was Vervaeke's definition set, but that doesn't matter as much as this is your definition set, your understanding of his definition set, and then the insights that you glean and the worldview you espouse from there will be understandable.
Yeah, a few more reasons for whoever's listening as to why we decided to revisit Lecture 7. We've gone all the way up to Lecture 19 now, and then we got to Neoplatonism and Plotinus, and we also spent a lot of time, me and you, discussing Agape. Agape was a very big lecture for both of us, and we've had a lot of time to meditate and think about and let that whole thing digest. And then when we were getting to Neoplatinus, a whole bunch of stuff about nomological order started coming in, and then I'm like, hold on a second, what exactly is nomological order again? And then I had to go back to Lecture 7 to understand that properly. And then when I did, it became obvious that some of the things we picked up on Agape and in some of the stuff in other lectures was very powerful in informing my understanding of this lecture. Now, the reason that we struggled with this lecture so much, this is now the third time we are doing this lecture as a podcast, is because, Vervaeke, as brilliant as he is, I think probably could have done this lecture a little better because there were like 7 definitions: agent, arena, worldview, attunement, nomological order, all within a span of about 15 minutes. And he would just say something like, and this is a nomological order, and this is what an existential mode is, without really defining these terms, because they kind of bleed into each other. They're very closely related to each other. So me and you, in our last attempt to do this podcast, really tripped over the definitions. And so we've just decided that, okay, I'm just going to give you my understanding of these ideas. I'm not saying this is Vervaeke's understanding, so if Vervaeke is listening, I apologize for butchering any ideas here, but this is going to be an interpretive summary, and I'm confessing that it's going to be imperfect, but there are valuable concepts here that I'd like to talk to Zane about, and so that's why we felt it was important to come back again and do it. Okay, so I'm going to do it in a different way. I'm going to do it piecemeal. The first thing I'm going to get to is the conformity theory of knowing being, right? So not just knowing, but knowing being. So the first idea to understand is Aristotle's theory of how we know things, right? So consider a tree. You see a tree and you know that it's a tree, but how do you recognize it so fast? What are you perceiving about the tree that allows you to identify it as a tree? You intuitively understand the various features of a tree, like the leaves and the branches and the trunks and the roots. You may not have the full dictionary propositional definition, but you have the idea of trees in your mind. You just intuitively understand the way that a tree is put together, the structural and functional organization of a tree, the thing about it that makes the tree what it is. Now, Plato referred to this as the eidos of the tree. All right, now let us suppose we cut the tree down. Now we have a bunch of wood, and with this wood we could make a chair, a table, or a ship. But what makes the same bunch of wood a chair over here and a table over there and a ship in another instance? The answer is the eidos of those things. The bunch of wood has put into it a structural and functional organization of a certain object. And by putting the eidos into it, it becomes that thing. And Plato argued that what was truly real was not the physical instance of a chair here or there, but the eidos of the chair. And if all the chairs in the world suddenly destroyed tomorrow, the eidos of a chair would still exist. And if that's true, it would seem that the eidos of things beyond time and space is what is most real and true. So this is Plato's theory of forms. Eidos has been imperfectly translated to the word forms here. Now, Aristotle agreed with this, and he asked further, what does it mean to know something? His insight was that to know something was to have the eidos of the thing in your mind. He pointed out that it was the carpenter who had the eidos of the chair in his mind, and then he shaped and put form into the wood. He informed the wood, and that is how the chair comes to be. The chair originated as an eidos first, and then it came into the world. The chair was in the mind of the carpenter, and therefore to know something is to have the form of the thing in our minds, to conform to the thing. And so this is the conformity theory of knowing. When we know something, it is because we have the eidos of the thing in our minds, we have conformed to it. Now, there is an intimate connection between our mind and the thing that we have conformed it to. Vervaeke references the conformity theory of knowing-being, right? So not just the conformity theory of knowing, but knowing being. And the word being here is really important because in a sense, the chair exists within us. It is a part of our being, and then it is expressed out into the world through us. So to know something is to be it in some sense. All right. So let's put a pin on that idea for a second and come to the geocentric world cosmos model of the world, right? So the geocentric world cosmos model is Aristotle's model of the world, where we are at the center of our cosmos, then things are moving around us, right? Aristotle's idea of the world cosmos also incorporated things like the world was made up of elements like earth, water, air, and fire, and the reason that things moved at all is because they were trying to get back to where they belonged. Now, leaving aside that, this is not understood as being correct anymore, the key point here, and this is really important, the key point is that in Aristotle's time, this model of the world was entirely plausible. This model of the cosmos made sense to those people who lived at the time. It did not contradict with their lived experience in any way. Now, when you behold a certain knowing being of the cosmos, then the cosmos in turn yields to your knowing being, by being intelligible and by being plausible and by making sense of so many things in your lived experience, you get a sense that you have correctly conformed to reality. Now, there is therefore a mutually reinforcing phenomena occurring where your knowing being of the cosmos and the cosmos itself integrate together with tight bonds of intelligibility and plausibility. Now, Vervaeke refers to this as a worldview. Now, I understand the term worldview to refer to this dynamical, integrative process of your modeling of the cosmos and the cosmos feeding back on your modeling and validating it. But the key takeaway for me here is that your understanding, knowing being, of the cosmos that you inhabit is not a propositional epistemic exercise. It is, again, a knowing being exercise. And I stress this point because our modern notions of understanding anything assumes an entirely propositional stance and a disembodied stance. You're just describing it from a disembodied way. But here what I'm saying is that your understanding of your cosmos becomes a part of you, who you are, in the way that Aristotle described it. It is a knowing being kind of understanding. Now, an intelligible and plausible cosmos allows us to inhabit the world as an arena, which is a place that is organized such that you know how you can act in it, it makes sense to you, you know where you belong, what actions are appropriate, how to measure and calibrate your performance. And a human who navigates this space is called an agent. Now, this dynamical, mutually reinforcing process that is a worldview can be abstracted up a level and reframed as the process of an agent-arena coupling. Just as we understand the cosmos in this mutually reinforcing dynamical way, the agent and the arena are also mutually reinforcing each other. The identity of the agent is contingent on the arena, and the arena in turn determines the identity of the agent. The two are co-identifying each other. They're not co-identifying with each other, they're co-identifying each other. The agent is able to navigate the arena successfully because it is intelligible and plausible, and the agent fits or conforms to it properly. The coupling of the agent and the arena is harmonized. Now, there's some imprecision again here in the lecture with respect to definitions, because all these terms are introduced in quick succession, but a new and very important term is introduced, which is an existential mode. The idea that makes the most sense to me is that an existential mode is a state. It is a state of being that is created by the way in which the agent and the arena co-identify. It's not a static thing, of course, because the co-identification of the agent arena is not static. It's a dynamical process. And so the state or the mode is subject to change. Your existential mode may be configured correctly or incorrectly. You could, for example, be an agent that does not understand the arena at all, and the process of co-identification has gone wrong. The arena is not intelligible. The dynamical process of creating your worldview has gone wrong somewhere, and as a result, your actions in the world seem absurd. They lack meaning. The process of creating a better fittedness of agent with arena so that the existential mode is harmonized is referred to as worldview attunement. And when that attunement results in a harmonization of your existential mode, when your agent-arena coupling is tight, when it makes sense, when it is correctly mutually reinforcing, we are said to have attained nomological order. All right, so those are two concepts, the conformity theory and nomological order. The third concept that's important here is the idea of rationality. What does it mean to be rational? So for Aristotle, rationality was a core characteristic of a human being. He described humans as rational animals. Rationality was understood as a process by which a human could overcome self-deception and error in their beliefs. This was something that Socrates illustrated. He would go to people in Athens and ask questions like, what does it mean to be courageous? And via dialogue and rational argumentation, he would illustrate that people didn't really have a good understanding of what that meant. They thought they did, but they were deceiving themselves. It took rational reflection to even become aware of their self-deceptions. And this was Socrates' big contribution, introducing the psychotechnology of dialogue as a means of rationally exploring our models of the world and our understandings of ourselves and finding where those were deceiving us. Now, in modern times, we have lost this sense of the word rationality. The word rationality means something like logic or the scientific method. And while those things do definitely give us a model of the world, it is a highly depersonalized, disembodied model. Science can tell us that the sun is powered by nuclear fusion, but it can't tell us if we should quit our 9-to-5 job and chase something more exciting. And yet both things, the nature of the sun and whether we should choose a different vocation, are best approached with a rational mind that is freed itself and corrected itself from self-deception. The rational mind, Aristotle argued, was the kind of mind that allowed us to cultivate better and better models of the world, or to put it a better way, better and better worldviews, to attain better nomological order. And we have to remind ourselves that in order to truly know something, like the model of the world or a worldview, we conform to it. We have a knowing being of it. So our minds conform to the worldview as we understand it. As long as we have an inaccurate view of the world, as long as the agent is not coupling properly with the arena, we are conforming to an eidos that is in some measure not rooted in reality, and we're living in delusion. And it is through the cultivation of a rational mind, Aristotle argued, that allowed us to come in closer and closer contact with reality and be able to attain a more secure nomological order. So I'm going to stop there. There's a lot of words and let you respond. I do have further thoughts, but I thought I'd let you respond to this.
No, I appreciate the care with which you've taken here. I think what you just said is a very clear delineation of an interpretation of an unclear lecture. I think, and no shade at Vervaeke, he's amazing. I mean, we've both gotten so much value, and nonetheless, I mean, he's not God, nor would he claim to be. And so, yeah, I think he was unclear here, and I think you've elucidated one pathway through that set of definitions that he threw at us very rapidly, and so I think this is workable in terms of like going forward with a discussion. I want, again, now I'm just uncharacteristically blowing smoke up your ass, giving you compliments, but I think, which is very uncomfortable for me. But no, dude, I think the other thing that comes to mind is the correct repetitive need to emphasize that knowing in Aristotelian terms, and perhaps even as we might say in meaning terms, is not disembodied. Is, hey, let's say that I could give you magically a grand unified theory, the field equations of reality at the physics level that every physicists have been clamoring for and trying to achieve. That doesn't give you a worldview. It doesn't tell you what to do with your life, right? It doesn't tell you how to live or how to interpret your everyday experience, because when I'm talking to you here on this podcast, I cannot do so at the level of the subatomic particles. Like, I can't have this conversation with that level in mind, and thus, no matter how precise or even correct that set of information is, it is not a knowing being. It is a knowing in which I cannot live. And so it does not help me with this project of trying to figure out how to live a good life or a meaningful life. So I think reiterating that over and over again, because it is so contrary to our modern conception of knowing, is incredibly valuable. And I think we should continue to reiterate that as we use the term rationality, as we use the term knowing going forward, because it's just so counterintuitive to how we use the terms now, and yet importantly so. If I can just be a brief tangent, actually, I practice, osteopathic medicine, and one of the weird situations that puts me in is I have had pretty amazing results that are a bit difficult to explain if what I'm doing is pure placebo or is not, or is ineffective or doesn't work or is nonsense. It would be difficult to explain these cases if that were true. And yet the explanation I've been given in training about why these things work and how they work and the way that I'm thinking as I'm doing the treatment is scientifically not supportable. And so I'm thinking on a model that I know to be false, and yet it is a livable worldview because it affords me this method of interacting with creating outcomes for patients. And so that just highlights this notion of the conflict between my scientific understanding and the notion of living in a worldview in such a way that things make sense and patients get better as a result of my participation in that worldview as an agent in the arena of the patient's biology. So random sort of tangent there, but just interesting when the scientific diverges, and yet you have a functioning worldview.
I'm going to pick up on that thread a little bit over here because you said the arena of the patient's biology, and that kind of leads me to the next point that I want to emphasize here is that he didn't actually expand on this in the lecture, but I think it's clear after having thought about this for quite a while that there isn't a universal arena that an agent conforms to, right? It's not like, there's one whole big world and, I'm perfectly fitted into this world. There's such a notion as, you have an agent arena coupling in a classroom, you are a doctor. So when you walk into the hospital or your clinic, you're assuming a certain agent arena relationship there. Then when you come home and,
your family,
that's a different agent arena.
Even the
coupling.
agent arena of your family is different than the agent arena of your spouse in particular, right?
Exactly.
So even within, you can have two cooperating worldviews and arenas
Yeah.
as you interact with your spouse on one level, and your kids may be in the same room, and all of that is fitted together in interesting ways.
The reason I want to emphasize that, right, is because the dynamical process of agent and arena co-identification, right, that worldview, the word worldview is very expansive, and it would, there's a temptation to think that he's discussing an overarching, all-encompassing framework that involves the whole world and universe and cosmos, right?
Good point.
It can be very narrow spectrumed sort of relationships, right? So you could have a nomological order within your career, and then go home and your whole family life is a disaster, right? And you have no nomological order there. And so there's also this notion of having more and more nomological order in different avenues of your life, right?
Yep.
The other thing that is important to bring up here is the reason that we are losing, a lot of people have, there's this meaning crisis, is that we're losing nomological order, right? We're not having the agent arena coupling exist. Our existential modes are confused. He refers to the word modal confusion in future lectures. So let's just use that word, right? When your agent arena coupling is not working and you're not getting that existential mode working, that apparatus is just not clicking, that's called that modal confusion, right? The reason we have modal confusion, there could be multiple reasons, but one reason is that the world has changed, right? You are just the same, but the world around you is evolving and changing so quickly that you may have had nomological order with the world that you lived in 10 years ago, but here we are now. The world has radically changed. In some way, it has changed for you.
Yep.
Maybe it's a global, technology, or maybe your wife has left you or something, so nomological order has collapsed there. But it's a global phenomena for sure, because there is so much change occurring in the world in this present day. And, we all want to think that we're living in special times, but we are kind of living in special times in the sense that,
Sure.
in the sense that, there's so much technological acceleration and the disruption that comes with that, and, the internet and the fast moving pace of the information stream in politics. And the COVID pandemic was another very disruptive thing where nomological order was broken. People really saw the world very differently. This is absolutely not a political...
Or the brokenness of the nomological order could no longer be hidden, I think is sort of the way I would take it.
Yeah, it became exposed, so to speak.
It's exposed, exactly.
This is not a political podcast at all. This is the first and last time that I will mention this. But, the election of Trump in 2016 was a very good example of how people thought that, America was one way. And then, hold on a second, this is not what I thought it was, right? And then a whole series of things happened. COVID was one of those things as well. And the world as they understood it, right, their knowing beingness of the world was exposed as not being correct, right? And their existential mode kind of was strained. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I agree. I will go so far as to say another way of thinking about even just self-referentially onto this project and Vervaeke's project here of the meaning crisis is this kind of modal confusion. So maybe a trivial example, going back to the medical type thing, is you go to the doc. Let's say you are experiencing a crisis of meaning, an existential crisis, and you go to the doctor and you're saying, "Oh, I'm having a mental health crisis, and I'm anxious, and I feel like nothing matters, and I'm feeling depersonalized or whatever." Well, the doctor's worldview is you are a bag of chemicals, so here's a benzo, and that's what makes sense, right? And yet it doesn't work. There is a confusion between what the actual world, the action is absurd, right? The prescription of a benzo.
Worldview, isn't it? It's disembodied.
It is, absolutely. And this is an embodied problem, and a disembodied view cannot solve it. And so I think you end up with this perception that most physicians' actions in the face of mental health crisis are absurd, and they are trying to encourage their patients to do absurd things. And that's why I think, the things that we have trivially found to be most effective are embodied things. Meditation, exercise, These are embodied experiences. They are not disembodied knowledge.
Social connection.
Right? Social connection, exactly right. So it's no mistake that this meaning crisis that has triggered this entire lecture series is sort of a product of modal confusion that is being more and more propagated and more exposed to our eyes as these events unfold to reveal the modal confusion maybe we all kind of knew was there but didn't think was that bad. And so, yeah.
So there's, a unique challenge to living in the modern world. Again, I'm fully cognizant of every generation thinks their life and times are unique and particularly troublesome, but I will posit to say that this time it's really true. But the problem though is that if you were to go back to Aristotle's time, right? It was he lived in a society where things were largely static, right? There was no huge disruptions in the social fabric of society. Things were pretty much the same. But whereas today we're living in an age where people are debating what a woman is, right? So this was not at all the case back in Aristotle's. Things were kind of static, right? And so he was creating models of understanding the world in a world that wasn't really changing that much, right? For example, his model of the world was the geocentric model, right? Like, we are at the center and things are moving around us. And, that's great and everything, right? But there was no consideration of, okay, what should I do for a living? Should I get married? Am I a woman or a man? What's my gender? I mean, there's all of the questions that in modern society are thrown at us today to solve, right? Well, what career should I take? Should I take on student loans, right? One of the reasons I think the younger generation in the U.S. especially are having such a tough time is it's not really clear anymore how you should navigate yourself in the world because we don't have a good understanding of the arena. The arena is changing so fast, right? And let's, for example, say this is the arena of needing to work, right? The arena of, a career, say. That is changing so quickly, right? You could go to school today to learn to be a computer programmer and find out in 5 years' time that AI, has taken over your job. You don't need to do that anymore, as an example, right? And there's many examples of this. Maybe in the 1960s, if you went to college and you got a degree that wasn't particularly useful, you decided to do it in poetry or something, right? You got a bachelor's degree in poetry. Well, what did that cost you? A few $1,000s, it wasn't that expensive back then, right? So it was a decision that had no big consequence. But today, you're 17 years old, you're planning for the next year to go to college. You have to make a decision at that young age whether to encumber yourself with God knows how much thousands of dollars of student loans, something that's going to be an albatross for the rest of your life, that's going to have profound consequences. Well, how do you navigate in that arena? How have how should you understand that problem? It's not obvious at all. And that's just one problem of many that modern people in Western society are having to grapple with. Things are changing so fast that even if you, like I said, you have a strong sense of yourself, because the way that you conform to your arena is so intimately integrated into your own identity. The world changing around you forces you to reconcile the changing world with your identity. You can't just ignore it, right? You can't just go to a cave and meditate and say, I'm just going to ignore the world. I don't care about the world. I'm just going to, But although even if you do that, you are still making a decision to some extent. You're just deciding, my arena is this cave, right? I'm just going to the cave. That's my arena.
Right. No, I what's interesting too is I agree with you. I think the world has to be reckoned with. It is changing very fast and in many ways. Not that's, again, even at the Hellenistic period, the unhoming that we've talked about in other episodes, there are some precedents for massive systemic change as well. However, we are arguably at least living in one of them, if not the biggest one of them. And the other, I think you've elucidated very clearly why you have to reckon with the world. The flip side of that is that a large percentage of that change is also bullshit. And what I mean that in the Frankfurtian term, is it is hijacking your salience system without actually providing you with value. So the moment that comes to my mind is in Sherlock Holmes. In one of the first episodes, he meets Watson, and Watson is amazed by his detailed knowledge of the map of London and all this, all this stuff. But he is not aware that the Earth goes around the sun. Right? He's like, no, I didn't know that. And he says, actually, now that you've told me that, I will do my best to forget it, because what possible use could it be to me whether the Earth goes around the sun or the moon, right? It makes no difference to me in solving crimes. So, but that's an interesting highlight of the notion that, hey, I have my agent-arena relationship. This information you're giving me might have the illusion of saliency, just like maybe some scientific theory might, but it actually tells me nothing about how to live in the world. And his solution was thus to ignore and or forget it, right? Whether that's the right solution or not, I have different views on it. But the notion there that we are beset by tremendous amounts of information, some of which truly must be reckoned with, right, and much of which has the illusion of importance without giving us any help whatsoever in how to live.
Making the task even harder.
Even harder.
Yeah. And that kind of comes back to the project of rationality that Aristotle was, talking about, that in order to be rational, free yourself of delusion, train your mind, right, to understand the world. And, this is what Vervaeke was getting at, where... Go ahead. Sorry.
Actually, yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in, that was
Sure.
just a perfect segue to something that struck me is, he again, we go back to this notion of the eidos as the lump of wood. The carpenter comes and he puts the form of the wood or the form of a chair into the eidos of a chair into the lump of wood, and thus it becomes a chair, and that he has informed the wood into a chair, right? That process of informing, of adding an eidos to something, Aristotle's view that Vervaeke talks about is that inorganic matter is informed into a living thing. A living thing is informed into something that is physically self-moving. That would be an animal rather than a plant, right? Then that self-moving thing is informed into something that is mentally self-moving, right? Something that has cognition in some way. And that mentally moving thing is informed into a rationally moving thing through the eidos of character. And that was an interesting notion, is that character, we might even say wisdom to some degree, is the thing that informs merely a cognitive being into a rational being through this ability to reject bullshit, to not fall into self-delusion, right? And to operate in the world in a way that is cohesive and coherent. So
that was lecture 6, right, with the dynamical systems theory, right? Yeah, that was. Right. I had to go back and listen to that as well in order to understand this lecture again properly. But that's exactly correct. Is that dynamical engine using rationality was used to inform our character, our decisions, so that we could be more and more human. And to be human is to be the most rational, right? To not be instinctive like an animal, because that's what makes us different, right? We are rational animals. This is what Vervaeke was getting at, just to continue my earlier point, in that Aristotle gave us a connection between the intellectual task of understanding the world and our sense of meaning, right? You could say our sense of identity, our sense of purpose, our sense of how to be better fitted to our arena, right? Although that is an intellectual task, right? For example, just to give you a random example, right? So for example, as you know, we are going through some kind of a kairos or renegotiation with respect to relationships, right? Divorce rates are skyrocketing. More and more people are single. There's a lot of confusion now, modal confusion, about what is it like to be in a relationship, right? What is the correct agent-arena coupling of a relationship, right? And there are now theories coming out, right? There's, people coming out with books and, maybe it's the economic theory of relationships, maybe marriage is not a thing, whatever it is, right? And all of these new emerging philosophies of relationships are trying their best to reconfigure or reimagine, remap, I should say, the arena. They're rational philosophical projects of saying, well, maybe it should be like this, right? And those are philosophical endeavors aimed at trying to understand the new world, the world that we now live in, right? The arena that we now live in vis-a-vis relationships, right? And that is a rational project. So you could say that when you open up such a book or when you have conversations with people about these subjects, you are engaged in the process of wisdom. You are engaged in the process of rationality. Correct. You are trying to understand the world. You're trying to get to a knowing being of the situation. You're trying to get a better agent-arena coupling. And while that might seem like, well, I'm just reading this book on relationships or I'm reading this guy's philosophy on whatever, it is a deeply spiritual exercise in as much it is an attempt to understand the world better so you can conform to it better. Right?
Correct.
And you wouldn't think that, right? You wouldn't think that that's a spiritual exercise, and yet it is. And that's what Aristotle offers us.
And it matters, right? And I think, our last conversation devolved down into a pretty acrimonious argument because we are taking it seriously. It's not just if it was just a philosophical exercise, we disagree about definitions, then what's there to get upset about? But it matters. It matters about how you're going to live your life. It is a spiritual enterprise, and thus there is emotion there because things hinge on it. It's not just speculation here, but actually, no, I'm going to base how I live in the world based on how I understand these discussions, and thus it is something serious and real. I would like to just speculate. I'm curious to see if this speculation plays out in future lectures, actually. So as I was listening to Lecture 6, I talked about the mental or the cognitive being informed by character into a rational being. One way of understanding Jung's argument, which you and I have talked about at other times, is a rational being informed into a self, into an individual. And Jung talked about the notion of individuation and figuring out not just you as a rational being, but you as you, the you-ness of not only your connection to the community, to the collective unconscious of humanity, but also your individual self as an individual. And so I'll be curious to see because I know Jung is coming up in future lectures, I'll be curious to see if there's a throwback to this notion of individuation or becoming so not just a rational being in Aristotle's view, but a further informing into an individual, which Jung called individuation. So just a slight prediction there. We'll see if that actually is a relationship that gets elucidated.
The other thing that occurred to me is, the Stoics were very much influenced by the ideas of Aristotle and the Greek philosophers, right? And one of the central tenets of the Stoics was engagement with the world, right? The Stoics didn't advocate going to a cave and meditating like the Buddha, right? No. They're like, no, you live in the world, you have to engage with the world is what it is, you have to understand it properly, and you have to live in it. And it makes perfect sense, right? If this is the Aristotelian heritage, that their immediate instinct was like, well, this is the world we live in. Not only do we have to engage, we have to understand it properly, we have to engage with it properly. There's no drawing back from it, right? Which is very much contrary to the sort of Buddhist tradition, right? Of really, Buddha abandoned his kids, right? He left the palace. He didn't decide to how can I be happy even in a palace, right? As Aurelius did, right? He decided to engage with the world.
Leave the palace. Right? Yeah, correct.
Yeah. He didn't, Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius actually engaged with the palace, right? He didn't leave the palace like the Buddha did. So I was very much struck by this notion that when you sit down to try to study the world, as complex as it is, whether it is economic theory, whether it's deciding how to plan your retirement, whether it's thinking about how to be in relationships, how should you manage your time vis-a-vis career, and friendships, and all of these things of trying to understand your arena are fundamentally spiritual projects, right? And again, I grew up in a Muslim tradition, and so I contrast, what I'm learning with Vervaeke to some of what I've been, I would say, indoctrinated with when I was younger, right? Where to be spiritual was to go to the mosque and pray a whole lot and, mindlessly read the Quran and do all these random sunnah-like things, very superficial. That was what spirituality was. It had really no engagement with the world, right? In fact, modern Wahhabi Salafist Islam actively discourages engagement with the world. It's like, well, this world doesn't matter at all, right? Because this world is going to end. The hereafter is infinitely long. And so math says that if you're comparing something that's infinitely long with something that's finite, then that means that this world is infinitely useless, right? And this was something I heard from actual Muslim scholars, right?
Totally.
So it is the opposite of engaging with the world. It is the opposite of being curious about the world and having your sense of meaning and purpose intimately tied to the intellectual project of sitting down and reading about the world, right? You may be reading about plants, I mean, whatever it is, right? But if it's connected to some attempt to, agent or to couple your agent with arena, then it is a spiritual task that it doesn't matter if it's about plants or about whatever. Right? It is spiritual if it serves your agent arena sort of coupling.
It's a great functional definition of spirituality, actually. And I like that it is an embodied definition, right? It's not a propositional definition of what spirituality is. It's, hey, does this assist you in your project of how to live in the world? And if it is furthering that, then that is the fundamental aspect of spirituality. And Aristotle called that character development, is how much time have you spent today on building your character, right? And there is how much time have you spent today promoting the co-identification process between your agent arena relationships, multiple, right? Between you and your family, you and your work, you and your but you and the world as well, in some sense, is I recently, this is a bit of it's a tangential episode perhaps, but I recently this just kind of came out of my mouth, and I don't know how true it is, but I think there's some truth in it, there is some notion that the opposite of anxiety is fascination. Like, there's some notion that being fascinated or engaged deeply in something is almost the opposite of anxiety. It's not peacefulness. I think that's a mistake that is that peace is framed as the opposite of anxiety, and I would say that's not true. I would say that deep engagement is the opposite of anxiety. And I think that very indirectly these things are pointing at a similar notion there.
So I had a few other thoughts on this lecture. One of which was that you could have a nomological order that was very tenuous, right? And yet it could successfully serve your entire lifespan, and you wouldn't be any wiser for knowing that your arena agent relationship was resting on very shaky foundations. Right? So one good example, because it's easy to fall prey to, well, everything, it makes sense now, everything is fine, and therefore I'm done, my project is over, I've attained nomological order, yay me. And that could be true for your whole life, right? And you could die a peaceful death, and people will say, well, he knew what he was about, right? He was fitted to his environment. He was where he belonged, all of those things. So a good example is, say you were, living in as an American Indian, right, before the white people showed up, right? And, you had no idea that there was a whole world out there, that there was other civilizations out there that were more powerful than you. They were coming. They were going to take over the land. And if you had died, the day before the first white man set foot, you would be existing in a nomological order with respect to your tribe and your understanding of the world and where you fit into it and all of those, and even your sense of where the world came from. There may be metaphysical.
You keep using this term white. I think that's inappropriate. We need to say melanin challenge.
Melanin challenge.
Yes, I insist on that being the terminology.
You could have that nomological order and live an entire life and then die and everything would be fine. Or, the very next day, marauding hordes of, white men or whatever may come and, kill your whole family, and then everything of your nomological order is challenged. It falls apart, right? And that, of course, is an ever-present danger in the modern world, right? Because it's no longer like hordes of invaders necessarily, but it could be just that, an election goes a certain way that you didn't expect, right? Or, something, an invasion happens, or, your entire 401k just vanishes and poof, because whatever, right?
Yeah.
So the nomological order, it's a constantly moving thing, right? It's stable, proportionate to your understanding of the world, how global that understanding is, and that's becoming more and more of a challenge, right? Because the world is getting more and more complex, right? So this is where we may talk about some of the Nassim Taleb's idea, right? Like you don't really understand the totality at all. You can understand the totality if your world is extremely small, if you live in some small remote village, right, and you don't interact with anything at all. But if you are a citizen of the global, village, then anything from outside could come. It could be a social media post. It could be somebody attacks you on social media, and before you know it, mistakenly, before you know it, there's a hordes of people standing outside your house, waiting to kill you, right? But you're like, what the hell just happened, right?
Yeah.
So that is a uniquely modern challenge, right? Like the analogy, of course, is that your village is attacked by marauding warriors or invaders you never heard of before. Yeah. Or it could be just some social media thing happens in the modern world because the modern world is just such a fast-moving target. So it's a unique challenge in the modern world, given how complex it is, that our nomological order changes so much. And I don't mind being a little bit personal. We've talked about this, off air many times. Both me and you are physicians, right? And you're a concierge physician. You are doing your own thing. You successfully understood the arena of hospitalist medicine to be completely screwed, right? Years before I did, right? And you're like, I'm not doing this. I'm doing my own thing. I'm doing concierge practice. I, on the other hand, stayed with hospital-based medicine. And as you know, over the last 10 years, the arena has changed a lot, right? It has very much shifted. And I have been struggling trying to conform to the arena as it is, right? And we've had multiple conversations about this, not on this podcast, but in person, about how I refuse to conform. I refuse to be what the arena requires me to be, and so there's no nomological order there. And I'm struggling to find a agent-arena coupling within the context of my career, because not that I have changed, the arena has changed, and I refuse to be an agent in that arena. I refuse to walk into that arena and participate because I feel there's fundamental ethical problems in that particular arena. So I'm challenged, right? And
I've told you many times you could resolve that challenge by just giving up on being an actually good doctor. And if you could just get rid of that one thing, then then the whole arena would open back up to you, and you could just be the proper billing and coding machine that you're supposed to be, right? Because that's exactly right. The arena has shifted to where you are not a doctor, you are a provider, and you are a provider of billing codes, frankly. Because you refuse to participate in that, you have not found a harmonious. You have been unable to attune your worldview. You have refused to attune your worldview, right? And so now you have to go in search of another arena, right? Which is why you found certain hospitals that you can stand to work in, but also with the awareness of the pattern that, hey, actually it's an interesting corollary. We talked about the sort of a native tribe being invaded. Okay, cool. We'll fall back into a smaller section of our land, right? We'll retreat into a certain area where we can still maintain that same previous nomological order, right? But it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And at some point you look at the pattern and you say, well, I've got to find a new arena. I've got to find a new way to be, because at some point, as Chris Rock says, I'm just going to be hopping in a circle, right? And
yeah. So there's another thing that, I think this is probably the most impactful sort of idea that flowed out of this lecture, which is that, if you wanted to inhabit, let's, for example, this is a good example, a good tangent. I'm a doctor. It's much more difficult to practice good medicine because of the state of affairs that there is. And now I'm trying, other endeavors in order to find a better agent arena fittedness, right? As you know, one of the things that I'm trying to do is to write a book, right? And I'm working on it, and I've tried over the years multiple times to write books and always failed. But one of the ways in which to think about it is that, okay, I want to inhabit an arena where I am a successful writer, right? How must I conform to such an arena, right? How can I have a knowing beingness where I'm in an arena where I'm a successful writer, right? And then that comes to, okay, what attributes does a successful writer have? Well, they write every day, they read a lot, they labor over their craft, and if the agent can engender the kind of attributes that is required to be fitted into that arena, then in some sense you are just creating the arena for yourself. Right? The arena now, it doesn't exist now. I don't have a best-selling book on Amazon or whatever, right? But there could be a hypothetical future where that future does exist. That arena exists in some hypothetical, undefined future. How do I get fittedness to that, arena? The answer is, to change characteristics about myself so that there is that fittedness. So that I start to cultivate characteristics within myself, right? Like, okay, a successful writer is diligent, they don't give up, they understand this is painful, all the things, right? They overcome self-doubt.
Death and rebirth.
Death and rebirth. And they persist, right? They just keep at it until that entire arena becomes viable to them, right? And then they're inhabiting it, right? And then, that comes to the whole notion of agape, right? Where agape is this sort of sacrifice to give birth to a life, right? That's one of the ways we've understood agape. Yeah. And so one of the ways you could think about it is if I want to inhabit a arena like that, what sacrifices am I making today to give birth to that arena? Right? So it's not so much that you go find the arena, then you inhabit it. There could also be the notion of you create the arena for yourself. And how you create it, you create it with agape. You create it with sacrifice every day. So when there are things that I don't want to wake up early and do some writing. I don't want to read this book, that will help me in this project. I don't want to be diligent. I want to give up. I want to eat ice cream today and just not do any work, right? But every time I put myself through discomfort, overcome self-doubt, I sit with unease. That is a sacrifice I'm making. I'm letting myself suffer in some sense, and experiencing a mini death almost, sacrificing for a future life, right? And that future life is really just a different arena, right? So what I'm saying is the causality is it can go the reverse direction also. It's not like you go and where's the arena? Create the arena, and you create the arena through agapic sacrifice.
I love that idea. I've been long fascinated by this notion of the metaphor of death and rebirth that is so often used in spiritual enterprises. And I think you've elucidated kind of one of the core aspects is that in order to become Atif the writer, some version of you has to die. Yeah. And then you will be reborn into a new, I quote Gibran all the time. And one of the reasons is he's a very spiritual writer, and he compresses these things that we spend hours sort of elucidating in propositional language. He compresses it into a line of poetry that conveys the essence in some way, the eidos in some way. One of my favorites is he has a short parable where he says, one day when I was burying one of my dead selves, the undertaker came up to me and he says, of all the people that come here, you alone I like. And I said, you please me exceedingly, but why is that? And he says, they come crying and go crying. You alone come laughing and go laughing. And there's a notion, phenomenal, right? Also the notion that this is an ongoing death and rebirth. It's not one time and then you're done, right? And so this notion that one day when I was burying one of my dead selves, these things happen, right? Routinely, right? It's a routine part of my life to have to go bury one of my dead selves, right? And then the notion that you come laughing and go laughing is that it isn't, I understand the death to be an act of love. I understand the sacrifice to be in the spirit of lovingness. And I am not, it's funny, I had this conversation earlier today at lunch with a friend, actually, just a few hours ago, is one of the challenges I think we have in the modern world is the chasing of feelings. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel good. I don't feel, right? And so I'm pursuing that feeling rather than, which will never allow you to make a sacrifice because sacrifices don't feel good. right? And so you are trapped fundamentally in the agent-arena relationship that you have, no matter how dysfunctional it may be. And so...
You might even say you have existential inertia.
Yeah, that's actually a great term. I like that. Yeah,
well, that's not our that comes in later lectures, if you remember. He talks about gnosis and how gnosis gets you out of existential
inertia. That's right. I'd forgotten that. That. Yeah, that's a great term. Yeah.
So, coming back to this idea of rebirths and, petit mal, right? Little deaths. So when you are inhabiting a different arena, right? When you are deciding, okay, I want to inhabit this other arena, right? You do the Gnostic move and you do have a sensibility transcendence, and now suddenly you're inhabiting a different agent-arena relationship. As we said, the arena influences the agent, and the agent influences, they are co-identifying, right? So if you have done that shift, you are a different person.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're co-identifying. Yeah. So definitionally, yes, you are no longer the same person.
Your identity, correct.
Your identity is different, right? Now, don't ask me to define identity, right? I was afraid you're going to ask me to give you a definition, right? But you understand the point is if they're co-identifying and you have shifted now to a different arena, you have identified a different arena to co-identify with, it is also recursively re-identifying you. So there is that little death, right, that occurs. You are a different person.
I would agree. So I have a patient that I've been helping along with quite an existential crisis in a lot of ways. And one of the interesting things is that so many of her agent arena relationships were dysfunctional. So many of those arenas had to be changed. So many of those selves had to die, that she had a hard time maintaining the continuity of her identity. Like she felt truly lost, like she had no, she felt like that depersonal, like, who am I? Because I have lost, if you change one arena, okay, the rest of you, that's a little death, that self dies and you become a new self in that arena, and the remainder of your arenas are consistent, right? If 95% of your arenas die, who the hell am I then, right? And I think that becomes a really interesting challenge, is to reform an identity in multiple arenas concurrently is a tremendous amount of work, takes a tremendous amount of time and courage, and it's a scary, terrifying process in a lot of ways, because you don't have anything to hold on to. There's no solid ground.
Well, that's an excellent point, right? So I think it's important to emphasize, right, that a nomological order is not a normative order, right? It's not a normative imperative. It doesn't tell you what should your nomological order be. It's just like, hey, this is how it works, right? Now your nomological order could be, hey, I want to be a Nazi, right? Like that's your nomological order. That's the should could be, it could go haywire, right?
And it's functional, right? I mean, the world made sense that way. If you were a white German in 1939, the world actually made a lot of sense in that sense, right? So yes, it's not an ethical order. It is a. It's just
this is how the wiring works, is another way of putting it. Now, how you should orient, what is the good you should orient yourself to, perhaps that is where you can get a sort of sense of center, a sense of, okay, this is what's holding it all together. I am moving forward in this direction. And, again, we can be personal again here, where I've told you a few years ago that I have identified, certain very key values that whenever they're exercised, make me feel like I'm exactly doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm where I belong. These are sort of my normative North Stars, right? And then, knowing that, as long as I'm living a life where these core values are always exercised, that is how I should orient myself, because that is, part of who I am. Now, part of also who I am is the nomological order, right? That's just the guts and bolts of how that order is created. But normatively, I'm orienting towards making sure these core values are exercised, right? So, in the lecture after Plotinus, St. Augustine, right? We're skipping ahead here, but Vervaeke talks about the three axes of meaning, right? So one of the axes of meaning is the nomological order. This is the reason why I came back to this lecture. I'm like, hold on, what is a nomological order again, right?
Yeah.
So one axis is the nomological order. The other axis is the normative order, like which, what is the good that you're orienting to? And then what St. Augustine did is he also gave it a narrative order, right? With the whole crucifixion sort of story. Like there was a story tying it all together. So he provided three axes of meaning as well.
We'll have to get into this on episode 19, right? But at least just within this discussion, one of the things we could say is the two examples we've just given highlight these things in certain ways. Or three examples we've given. So you as a doctor, right, insisting on trying to provide good care, your normative order is in conflict with the nomological order.
That's
right.
Great. I like that, yeah.
If you were a Nazi or you're living in Nazi Germany, but you're refusing to be a Nazi, similarly, your normative order is now in conflict with your the nomological order, and or the example I gave just to flesh that out of the patient who had lost so many of her arenas, her narrative order had fallen apart. There's a break in the story. Now this moment has happened and I feel completely disconnected from who I was before and who I am after. And there's a gap, but the story doesn't move forward. It just hops, right? And that's very disturbing. The reason I bring that up is one of the challenges then is to find a way to try to step back and say, okay, I'm a person of conscience living in Nazi Germany, and my normative order is out of sync with the nomological order. How do I step back into a frame that allows me a nomological order that is in keeping with my normative order? And maybe I become a conscientious objector. Maybe I sacrifice my life for that purpose. Maybe I try to, save people, or maybe I just move away. Maybe I just say, hey, you know what, like this, I need to go to a different place, a different arena, right? All of those are sort of solutions to that conflict, and you becoming a writer is a similar solution, is to say, hey, you know what, like my normative order, nomological order out of conflict, I need to step back and find a different nomological order in order to that will allow me my normative order to remain intact on some level. Or by contrast, I guess maybe you become a Nazi and sacrifice the normative order and go along with the nomological order, and you give up the ethics in order to adapt to the world as it is.
Yeah. Or the Nazi could actually think that the normative force is on his side, right? And the axis of meaning are all coherent, right? None of which is to say that this way of explicating meaning and purpose is bulletproof in giving you the right set of ethical instincts, right? That is still a project of rationality. That is still a project of conforming to the world better, right? That's still an open-ended, ongoing, iterative process, right? Where you study, you continue the process of rationality, and you continue to excise yourself of self-delusion, right? And you continue to exercise in that whole wisdom sort of tradition as well. I'll answer the question for myself, right? And this is probably an incomplete answer. And I've told you this again, we talk about medicine all the time outside of the podcast, which is that, I've identified core values that, whenever these are exercised, I feel good, I feel complete. Even when the exercising of them is difficult and it's challenging and it drains me, I would still rather be doing it anyway, right? The normative force is strong enough to I just want to do it regardless. I have let that be my North Star, right? My values, right? And these core values. And, if you were to blow that up, right, and say, well, okay, the perfect crystallization of your supreme core values is God, right? And that's kind of how then God gets into the sort of normative force picture, right? Is that, okay, God is your normative force. And as long as you worship God and you follow in God's path and you have a normative direction, then you have to figure out the nomological direction, right? So you could be, I mean, Martin Luther is a great example of this, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
He decided, hey, listen, I'm a Christian, you're a Christian, but I don't agree with your Christianity, and I have, and the normative order is broken. We may feel we have the same nomological order, but we have different normative orders, and so I'm just going to, nail these, protests to the church wall, right, and say, hey, listen, I can't do this anymore, right? I have to protest, right? So that's a good example where even, people who are in, sort of ideologically adjacent and societies that were not very, different from each other, there was still conflicts in, people's idea of what the normative order should be, right? Even if nomologically they were connected, they were fitted.
I really think this is a very fruitful thread, I think, in a lot of ways, because, we talked about, sort of Nazi Germany and like people becoming Nazis and this and that and how that happened. But there's your example of medicine is a very poignant and present sort of thing, right? Because how many hospitalists that you and I have known who maybe even trained with us under the same teachers who told us this is how you should be practicing medicine. This is a calling. This is an honor to serve in these ways. And you need to be taking this seriously. How many of them have bent that normative order to the nomological order of modern hospital medicine and are just providers of billing codes and just seeing 25, 30, 35 patients because that's the current order. And the way that bending happens is important, I think, to parse. Like nobody becomes, actually that book that Jordan Peterson cites all the time is Ordinary People, right? Is how do people walk from being ordinary people to committing atrocities? How do doctors walk from the idealism of residency to being a billing machine that sees 25 patients and is out by 2 p.m. going to the golf course because you didn't do a good job seeing 25 patients in the hospital, but you tell yourself you did fine. None of them think now if you say, hey, did you do a good job? They say, yeah, I did a great job, right? Because they've bent that definition progressively, little by little, little by little. They keep bending it as to what constitutes a good job. Even I went into concierge medicine for that reason, is that even in the clinic in residency, we saw how many patients in an afternoon. So not that many, honestly. We started with 4 and then 8, maybe 10, 12 patients. It's really not. There are family practice docs here seeing 30, 40 patients a day, right? We weren't being asked to see an unreasonable number of patients, and yet I was aware that I was not doing a good job. Once the number got over, a certain number of patients per afternoon, I realized, oh yeah, you know what? I'm being told by my attendings, if you come in for diabetes and high blood pressure, I tell you have to make another visit for that high blood pressure. Make another appointment. Because I'll see you for 15 minutes to manage your diabetes medicines, and it's 15 minutes later, another week, to manage your blood pressure medicines, because of course there's no relationship between those things, right? And so the notion of holding myself account to when is the system forcing me to do a lesser job, to feel that pain, to not explain away or say, well, this is how it's done. This is good medicine. I fixed their diabetic medication and I fixed their blood pressure medicine. No, I never mentioned their diet or their exercise or their weight loss or anything that would actually matter, but I did my job, right? And to write that off, that's how that happens, that's the progressive bending of your normative order to try to maintain a nomological order.
Yeah, that's
right?
Exactly right. I in defense of those people, a lot of physicians who do this, and we run into them. I run into them all the time. They're up to their necks in student loans. They may have kids.
Sure.
I'm not making excuses for them, right? But
No.
I don't have student loans.
There are real pressures there. For sure.
I don't have student loans and I don't have kids, right? So I don't have that. I don't have those issues, right? So I can walk away, right? And so I can maintain that normative order because I have certain luxuries that situation provides for me, right?
Totally.
There's trade-offs with everything, I suppose, right? But
Yep.
I would say that they have nomological ordering, for example, in that they see themselves, their deepest sense of self, their deepest sense of nomological order. And perhaps there's another tangent to be made about here, that certain nomological orders are more important than others, right? So their nomological order of being a provider for their family, of being a dad or a mom, supersedes everything else, right? And so if they're doing, we've run into to be very politically incorrect, but this is true. I've seen it with my own eyes. Female doctors, right, who, they have kids and, that's all they're talk about. And you can tell they're not like really invested in the medicine, right? They're not like really moved. They're not, they're not like, they don't get a rise when, things go wrong, with their patients. They're like, well, what are you going to do, right? And then they'll show you pictures of their kids again, right? As you're, where, you may be ranting about how many patients you have to see, and they'll just whip out, pictures of like, little Timmy went to the park and look at how cute my son is, which is perfectly fine. I mean, but they are getting a greater sense of co-identification as a parent, right, and less so as a physician. Right, and so there's a loosening of the normative order when in the arena of their in the agent arena coupling of their doctor-patient relationship, right? And we are both pretty passionate physicians, and so for us that's unconscionable, right? But who are we to say?
No.
Like who are we to impose our normative priorities on somebody else, right? I totally get that, right? But that is how they perhaps quote unquote live with themselves, right? Is like, well, I'm a great mom, which I'm sure they are, or a great dad, and that's what's most important to me.
And by contrast, I mean, you would blow their minds if you were like, look, does little Timmy really need to eat every day? Every day? Like, honestly, maybe you should stay late in the hospital and he can skip a couple meals. It's not the end. Well, that would blow their mind, right? Because that's not the hierarchy of their arenas, right?
Just to
Their
be clear,
arenas
for anyone listening, you're not actually literally suggesting little Timmy be starved so some patient can be taken care of.
Correct. No,
I know you were just joking. But yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about three axes of meaning here, right? And so
for sure.
It's important to understand that nomological order is just the guts and bolts of how these relationships and co-identification with your agent arena work, but it doesn't give you a normative insight, right? It doesn't say, well, this is the should of it, right? This is just how it works. And one of the components of the meaning crisis is that we don't have normative or we don't have nomological order at all anymore, right? Even if we had a normative sense, even if we knew how to orient ourselves forward, we don't have a nomological ordering at all because we have a lack of fittedness with our arena as a result, right?
And that is enhanced the more we dive into sort of disembodied propositional knowledge, right? Is the more we dive into, or even, I don't know, even, in a Talebian sense, we talk about this, like how important is the news? You've recently kind of explored that, is we have this sense that the news is super important or whatever, but really, does it help you live a better life? Like on the ground? Hey, okay, maybe the latest science. I love science. I love scientific discoveries. I love physics. I love researching pure mathematics, and there's some amazing things being discovered there. But I also understand that none of that's going to help me figure out how to live my life, right? Like it doesn't help because the nomological order has to be an embodied order. Like it has to be the agent arena identification is lived in real time, not thought about. And I mentioned Jung earlier. That was actually Jung's criticism of talk therapy was that. This is the problem with talk therapy, as much as it can be helpful, is that it is fundamentally propositional. And so, and the real therapy in his mind, the real growth in his mind came from the process of embodiment, which was then left to the client to go out and do maybe on the basis of what he talked about with the therapist, but Jung viewed that as a real shortcoming of traditional talk therapy.
Yeah, I mean, the way to reach for these things, right, is to keep exercising the notions of rationality, to keep being self-reflective, to keep, this whole lecture, we've been going over it back and forth for some weeks now, but it's highly motivated me, right? It has given me a way of being spiritual. I said, okay, one part of spirituality now is understanding myself better, like through meditative practices, contemplative practices, so that my goals of being a more rational person, not prone to self-deception, can be exercised. And then some of that can be lensed into understanding the world, whether that be reading a book on the arena that I want to inhabit, for example, or a book that would help me better understand the arena I want to inhabit. And creating roots or connections between those set of activities and a deeply spiritual sense of myself. Like one of the things that I've always identified as that I know that I'm deeply spiritual. I want to live a life that's, oriented towards a larger sort of goal and purpose. There's a hadith, right, that comes to mind, right? I forget who said it exactly, but the idea was that before the Prophet Muhammad came along, there was a man, right, who just like looked at the heavens and the stars. He says, Allah, or God, if you can tell me how to worship you, then I would, but I just don't know how to. Right. And that is, he was frustrated. He said, I just don't know how to do it. Right. How do I worship God? Like, what is God and how do I worship him? Right. And so I very much resonate with that hadith. Right. And had a very a good sense of this for many years. Right. Is that there's some part of me, right, that wants to live a more whole spiritual life, but I don't know what that means. Right. What is that? Right. I mean, empirical science, doesn't give you any like help there at all. Right. And this is like one piece of the puzzle for me. It's like, okay, it is spiritual practice, right, to know yourself better so you can have a better understanding of your arena-agent coupling, so you can get a nomological order. Now, that's not the whole part of it, right? But that is an important part of it. So next time I'm deciding to read a book, for example, about, investing, whatever, right? There's a way now, right, to connect it to a spiritual enterprise. Like, well, the reason I'm reading this is because I want to be, a stable person so I can help other people. And therefore, that means I should be able to manage my own money better. That's what a wise person would do that can help. One of my core values is to be able to be helpful to other people. Right? You can only do that from a position of strength, right? So if I am trying to get good about managing my money so I can one day be of use to somebody else, right? Then reading a book on investing or managing my money better now is tied to a much deeper sort of core value. I mean, and that kind of guts and bolts was not present right before I went to this lecture, right? Understanding the arena, like Aristotle is telling us, is part of that rational project is part of our meaning-making activity, right? It is deeply connected to it. It's not some disembodied, well, I'm just a greedy person. Someone recommended this book and that's why I'm reading it, right? And I want to be smart at cocktail parties, so I better read this other book as well, right?
Right.
Those things are not connected to a deeper spirituality.
Yeah. And I mean, here's an interesting spin on that, right? Is that you and I don't tend to go to many cocktail parties, right? But yesterday I was at a networking event for the practice, for trying to get new clients, building the practice, spreading the word that I think is hugely important. I want it to be dramatically influential in medicine. Well, you can't do that if you don't have any patients, right? So you have to actually go out and market it. So I go to this thing. It's a health-focused entrepreneur thing. Well, you know what? People are talking about gluten, and they're talking about raw milk, and they're talking about, you have to know what is being said. You do have to be aware of the perspective and if you're going to argue with it, you better know your stuff. You better know why you're arguing. It can't just be like, well, I'm a doctor, like I know. Well, you don't, right? Like, so at the cocktail party, you better have read the book, right? Because if you're not going to come there correct with a real understanding of the issues and say, hey, you know what? Actually, it does look like there are people who are sensitive to the casein in milk. And for those people, it can be very helpful to either consume raw milk or to, go off milk altogether. But the raw milk comes with these infection risk, this percent infection risk and whatever. So if you're willing to trade off the risk for the benefit, then that's fine, right? Okay, that's a perspective, but you can't have that perspective if you've done no reading, right? If I'm just relying on, that was not anywhere in the internal medicine board exam, right? And so, you've got to keep up with the real world of health and wellness, and to have and in order to communicate. And so that then what I was saying is, performing at that particular cocktail party is actually tremendously important for my life's project, right? It's non-trivial. Now, if I go hang out at some other cocktail party and they're talking about some political thing that I don't care about, then I haven't read those articles, and I'm happy to learn or hear your perspective or whatever the deal is, but it's not a part of my agent arena relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And as much as you wish to inhabit that arena, you should be interested in the subject matter, right?
Correct.
But if you're not interested in inhabiting an arena where people are talking about politics, or if the arena of politics is not an arena you wish to inhabit, then you should not, I mean, I think this is all...
What difference does it make to me whether the earth goes around the sun or the moon? Right? It's
exactly
like,
right. That's a very similar... It's an exactly... similar mapping, right? It also goes to given how complex the world is and how many books there are that you could read, right? To be clear about what it is you should be. Yes, exactly. Focus. You have to be clear about what knowledge. There's a finite number of hours in the day, right? And so, and I told you this the other day as well, as whenever I get into meditating, my focus is really sharp, and I have this thirst to like consume books. I'm like, I want to read all the time. And then sometimes I'll just like pick up some esoteric, completely irrelevant book, because, this is again, years ago, where I didn't really have a good understanding of like, okay, if I have all this power and focus, where should I direct it to, right? What should I do with it, right? Because there wasn't this ordering idea before.
There's nuance even in that, right? So there's the terminology that is used here is the explore-exploit conundrum, right? And so one of the ways you can think about it, if you're a hive of bees, and you know that there's a nice field of flowers with lots of pollen in a particular direction, how much time should you be spending exploiting that field, and how much time should you be exploring trying to find a new field for when that one runs out? Because it will, right? Roughly speaking, it seems to be the optimum, game theory optimum seems to be somewhere around 80-20, roughly, right? Meaning 80% of the time you should be exploiting what you already have, or what you know should be your focus, and 20% of the time you should be exploring. And so both things are correct as long as you get that ratio correct. So sometimes you should pick up the esoteric book about who knows what, just because it's interesting, just because like, for no other reason, right? Just exploring. Just no, this is not, it's unfocused activity. Yeah. Now, you shouldn't do that 80% of the time. That's a problem, right? Yeah. That's a lack of focus. So yes, 80% of the time, you need to focus in on exploiting the nomological order that you have, the agent-arena relationship that works. You're the one that currently functions. 20% of the time, you should be saying, hey, this agent-arena relationship might be fragile in some way I don't understand. This nomological order might break down, and all of a sudden I'm going to need a new one. So let me make sure I have some awareness of other things and start exploring other lives, other selves that could exist. Not that I pulled the trigger on them, but I mean, I also program. I make apps, right? Now, it's not a huge part of my life. I mean, I made one recently. Like, I enjoyed making it. It took me, many more hours than if I were a more proficient programmer, right? But the reality is that's not 80% of my focus. However, stranger things have happened. False accusations against doctors, malpractice lawsuits with no basis. People have lost their licenses through no meaningfully bad action of their own. That nomological order could fall apart.
Yes. Yeah.
Pretty quick, right? And so some person decides to get it in their head to make a claim on against me at the TMB, and the truth of it may or may not be the most relevant factor there, right? And as a result, I am well aware that I spend a little bit of time programming because I may need another nomological order at some point, right? And that's true of other endeavors as well.
Yeah, to expand on that a little bit, perhaps you should have a sort of normative order, a sense of should about where you want to orient your life towards, right? And for me, that's rooted in, that comes from core values. Like I want these core values to be embodied in my life at all times, right?
Yeah.
And then the next question is, what agent arena coupling, what existential mode should I try to pursue in order to make that a reality for myself? And then it is a project of rationality where I am cognizantly, very self-consciously avoiding self-deception in answering the question of whether I'm truly heading in that direction, whether I'm truly getting to that ordering, right? Because you could bullshit yourself too, right?
Yeah,
in a Frankfurtian sense, right? You could just, I'm making progress, right? And you're not really making progress at all, right? You're just fooling yourself, you're bullshitting yourself that you are making progress, and you're really, and that's where the rationality, the stepping outside of yourself and really examining with a critical eye. The other thing I would say with this example of, well, maybe you could lose your license because of some frivolous lawsuit, so you need a fallback. That, I think, speaks to the complexity, again, of our modern world, right? Where if you were like, a physician in pick a random country in the 18th century, there's no lawsuit situation. There's no, either do they even have medical boards back then? I thought you just graduate medical school and that's it. You're done, right? I think.
If you go far enough back, there actually aren't even medical schools. You just apprentice with a physician.
That's right, yeah.
And he approves you and sort of like he rubber stamps your right to practice.
And then
as a physician,
after that, it's just reputation based, right? Oh, this
Correct.
doctor in town, right? Like he does a good job, and that's all you need, right? That's all the credentialing you need. So the complexity of the world also is what makes it challenging to maintain a stable nomological order, right? Because it could be disrupted in any number of different directions, right? And then you're going to have to conform. Sure. You have to have a knowing being again to a different agent arena, which is, again, it adds to the complexity, and it's why we have this meaning crisis, right? Rising, right? Is that nomological orders just keep getting broken over and over again, whether it's we're learning more about how the universe works, or whether or not jobs are being disrupted, or whether traditional institutions like marriage or democracy or government or monetary systems are being disrupted. We are constantly being forced to adapt, and as we talked about, the adaptation, these are mini deaths, right? It could be that we really liked the old nomological order, but it's just not available to us anymore.
Yes.
It's just the arena has changed. It's now you got to adapt. It's
that's right.
Tough shit, right?
Yep. I mean, that's an important framing. I think that's something to double click on. Actually, is yes, you may have liked that previous nomological order. It may have made a lot of sense. Things may have been great for you in that nomological order, and it may be gone and not coming back. And that's also, in terms of not bullshitting yourself, deal with reality as it is, right? You can't be trying to deal with a fake reality that no longer exists anymore and say, well, weren't things so great when, right? Well, it's not when, it's now. And this is the world as it is, right? And so if, medicine has taken a certain path, you have to say, well, what am I going to do about that? It is what it is. I can spend all my time daydreaming about how it used to be, right? Or I can figure out like, well, and you found a hospital where you really resonate, at least for the time being. And so you have done sort of what we talked about with the American Indians. You've retreated into a smaller arena of the world. Like you found one tiny hospital where you're able to practice high quality medicine, and
but the barbarians are coming at the gate. They're
the barbarians are at the gates. That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. And so, at seeing that pattern, you're like, hey, this is the world as it is. This is the direction, the trend of the world as it is. And so, I need some other plan. I need some other now. Who knows? Maybe this tiny hospital will never change in your lifetime, and you'll be able to ride out the storm from the barbarians. They won't quite reach your gate in time before you die, right? Yeah. But looking at the world, that seems perhaps a thin margin of hope, and certainly not the only plan you want to have in place.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I think this was a much more fruitful conversation than the last attempt.
That's setting the bar a little low there. Yes, it's definitely more fruitful than the last
But
one.
I'm
Sure.
very happy we came back to this lecture. Like I said, I felt that there was a lot that we really missed. I kind of went back and watched our take on it from a year ago, and I don't think we got it back then, right? And the notion of using agapic sacrifice to reorder, for the agent to change the arena or find a new arena was a big insight for me.
Sure.
And the way that the arena actually informs your identity in a very profound way that you can't ignore, right? Because we have this sense of like, our identity is here, disembodied from outside the world. That was always my model growing up as well. And, there's a pride to it almost. Like, who cares about the outside world? I'm just here doing my own thing, right? And that's just not how it works.
Notion that our identity is itself distributed somewhat into the world, into the arenas that we choose, right? Into the people who inhabit those. I mean, we talk about this. I think, you can see this continuing our medical examples, like the trouble that doctors have gotten into about how they speak about patients, in the medical lounges or whatever, whenever some of those things have gotten out, right? Because the arenas clash. It's like, hey, like these are different frames, and maybe they should clash. Maybe that's I'm not making a normative claim here, but I'm saying that, our sense of who we are is extended out into these arenas, and we become different people in those different arenas, and the totality of them kind of starts to form big parts of our identity that is not just here, right? It is in fact distributed out into these cultures, subcultures, area. How I interact with my parents is very different than how I interact with you, is very different than how I interact with nurses or patients or whatever. And each one of those aspects of my identity builds up into a totality, right? But they're all distributed. It's not just here as a monolith.